A while back, I promised you a comprehensive video about the duck curve and home batteries and electric vehicles. So let's get to it. Alright, so this is going to be a bit of a special video dedicated to the duck curve. We've had a couple of responses, and so I thought it was time to clear up once and for all some of the misconceptions that folks have about the duck curve, especially as it was presented by Vox. So let's take a look at the duck curve and how it can be and should be solved by a application of some home batteries. So let's start off by restating Vox's argument for those who haven't seen this yet. I'll put a link in the description to their original video. So the thing with the Vox video, it's entitled "The Duck Curve is Solar Energy's Greatest Challenge." It was actually a pretty good video. I enjoyed it. It was like most Vox videos. It's well researched and well presented. But as you've already guessed, myself and many others had a bit of a issue with it. That particular video seemed a bit uncharacteristically biased for some reason, and they chose to just flat out ignore the elephant in the room. We'll get to that in just a second. They painted the duck curve as this incredibly insurmountable obstacle that it just isn't. And then the thing that really got me is that they didn't mention the batteries until the very, very end of the video, and then they mentioned it as though it was something that the utility companies should do to save us all from the duck curve. So now I'm not saying that the utility companies shouldn't install battery banks. They should. They should install big ones. Not everybody has solar, and not everybody has solar and batteries. And so the need for the grid to be able to balance itself via the same method as we're going to show you for the home is absolutely necessary. But there are huge advantages to storing that power locally, as we're about to see. So let's give this a nice energy sovereignty project deep dive, and we'll start with this. This is the duck curve. So the horizontal lines that you see, they represent a certain amount of load, and it's not defined, but it's also not important. All that is really important is that you can see that there's an amount of delta, an amount of change along that curve as perceived by the utility companies. And so then the other thing that's important to notice about this graph is that if you'll notice on the bottom, there are these vertical little tick lines. Well, those tick lines denote that it's a 24-hour day. That's also important. So what that shows us is that that this is a single day. And it's not just any day, it's not an average of days across the year, otherwise that would show some other strangeness as far as shifting along that 24-hour day of tick marks, and it's certainly not a winter day. Winter days don't show hardly any solar contribution. So this day is probably in June. Well, our peak production day last June in 2018 was June 10th. And we produced on that day, after the inverter was done with it, 68.035 kilowatt hours. This on a day when we used 28 or so. So let's position this day on a graph. There. So it's obvious, again, that we're trying to show us a worst case scenario. So this graph is going to be representation of somewhere around that date. It's obviously not a graph from a day in winter, like I said. And so Now let's put this duck curve in perspective. This is a snapshot in time. It shows just one day. We put it on the 10th, but it doesn't really matter. All of June was a crazy production day. So here, let's look at all of June. Boom, here we go. So that's what the entirety of June looks like. Now, you can see the concern of the utility companies. Every single day, they've got a ramp way down, and then all of a sudden shoot way back up. Whoop, 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 every day humping. And in June, it must be an absolute nightmare. And so I'm not trying to say that that this isn't an issue for the utility companies. It is. Power plants are not nimble things. They're not things that you can just kind of switch on and switch off. So that means that in order to recover when you get that neck of the duck, that they have to do some pretty crazy mechanics, bringing power in maybe from other states or things like that to try and deal with that issue. So I'm not saying that it's not a problem, but I am saying that it's really easy to solve. So let's pull up a shot from a previous video that we did. This is showing our power generation from June 2018. So this graph and the red line shows our average consumption that month of 28 kilowatt hours per day. So clearly we're guilty of helping to create the duck curve on that. Clearly we've created a massive amount of power, and all that power goes away as soon as the sun starts to go down. So guilty as charged. So that means that we need a utility company to come in and save us for God knows how much money, right? No, I don't think we do. The Energy Sovereignty Project is designed to demonstrate that one thing only. It's designed to demonstrate what happens when you have a home who consumes an average of, say, around 30 kilowatt hours a day, produces from a 10 kilowatt system, but does so through a bank of 90 kilowatts of battery and has an electric car. So let's see what that looks like. Now, we're pretty early in the year. I can't really definitively tell you what the winter breakdown looks like. We'll go ahead and cover that at the very end of the video. We'll do maybe a thought experiment about all of that. We're just starting our year-long test, so please follow along with us. As we start to escape winter, we'll be able to tell some more definitive things about what time of the year we hit that breakover point and all of that. But what I can tell you is what June looks like. So let's go back to our duck curve and take a look at what that looks like here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line here that isolates just the worst case scenario, their 2020 line. This is here. So that basically looks like what we did to them in June. Boom, neck, and then the quick rapid fall off in the evening. Yeah, that's basically what we did. Obviously on the left is your midnight, and then as you progress, you're going through morning, and then to the right is your evening. So here's where it gets a little more interesting. So as solar rolls on, the power grid has to roll off, all right? And then at solar peak, the utility companies are already scrambling. I mean, they already know what's coming. All right, and so then that's when, like I told you before, they start maybe switching other power sources. They put power plants on standby, and then everybody's off to the races as the sun goes down, the solar peels off, and now they have to supply all of that grid power that comes on. Everybody comes home. It's summer. Some people are putting on the air conditioning. Everybody's cooking. They're turning the lights on and the computers when they get home. So the problem with solving the duck curve seems to be who you're asking. And I'm seeing too many people from the utility side come up and say, oh, well, we can solve this for you. And so let's take a look at the problems that exist now, dawn to dusk. So when presented with those who only want to talk about the negative aspects of solar, that's when you get people showing you things like the duck curve. And they show how bad it is for them and all of that. But that's not fair. So let's start by showing this. Here's the same duck curve graph, but now you'll see that red line that I've included in there. That red line is the actual load on the system as a whole, right? What happens to the grid from the consumer's side of it, how much power is actually being used. So what they're not really telling you is that, so that red line is what's being billed for. So now let's put in some other lines. Now we see the solar contribution that leads right up to where that usage line is. Well, in the trough, everything that's above that line is power that is being fed to the grid by solar that the power companies are not creating. Solar is contributing that with their extra power. They're going onto the grid, and that is power that the utility companies are getting for free. That's the part they're not telling you. So we don't really have as big a problem as what they're telling you. What we have is a control problem. How do we better meter that power out over the course of the day instead of just throwing it at them all at once, so that they can lower the amount that they have to produce and at the same time raise the belly of that curve so that it's basically flat? So here's how we do that. Let me pull up that image from 2018 again. We'll take another look at the at June 10th here. So for all this graph shows us an overage, we still did have to purchase power from the grid. Hence the reason why I said we contributed to that duck curve. We purchased power in the evening from the grid. We used grid power. So our daily production started around 6 in the morning. By 7 a.m. it had matched the amount that the home was consuming, and so then everything else from 7 on is overproduction basically. And so by 11 a.m. here's another one, boom. By 11 a.m. the system is at peak power, and it's producing 7.6 kilowatts, and it'll do that until 1:45, almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we get that fall off, and now the grid has to then come in and compensate for those losses. So back to our curve. How far does this overproduction go? So for that, we have to stop thinking about this curve now in terms of the overall grid. Now let's start to think about this curve like we just did in terms of the consumption for the Energy Sovereignty Project home, right? So now we can imagine what it'd be like if every residential home had solar and batteries and an electric car, okay? So we're gonna put benchmarks at 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. And the reason I'm doing that, here we'll bring that up, the reason I'm doing that is to show at what point our production both started to meet our demand and ceased to meet our demands. And so then now we've plugged in our solar contribution. You can see that. And now, because again we're not talking about the grid anymore, now we're talking about the Energy Sovereignty Project home as an individual home. Let's take a look at our overage. Boom, here we go. So at 7.6 kilowatts, I'm producing 2 to 3 times the amount of power that I'm using. So now when you look at this graph, now you can see the amount of overproduction that the home has. Now this is rough, right? It's not I'm just trying to do this to illustrate what is going on. But no, I'm not joking. This is serious. For anybody who think that this might be any kind of an exaggeration, it's not. This is actually, if anything, it's very conservative, because when we're talking about the Energy Sovereignty Project home itself, it gets to be a pretty easy thing to look at. So if you look at this graph, it means that the volume of the graph in the dip and above that black line, it has to exactly equal the entire volume below the black line and then some. That's how much that additional solar is producing. So now we come to the part where we look at what happens to this curve when we add an 80 kilowatt hour capacity battery. So here's the duck curve for the Energy Sovereignty Project home with batteries on June 10th. Nothing from the grid. Flat. Completely flat. And we'll prove that later as we go along. But like they say in any good infomercial, but wait, there's more. If you don't send any power back to the grid, the day looks like this. So now not only did we not take anything from the grid that day, we got 125 miles of driving. So again, that was June 10th. June 10th. Well, you see where this is going. This is all of June. That is the duck curve for the entire month of June 2019 as we will see it. No power at all from the grid. Zero. None. And in addition to not having to pull any power off of the grid in June, we get over 100 miles a day of driving. So if we were talking about just June, then we probably wouldn't be seeing so much pushback from the utility companies, the automobile manufacturers, the oil companies. But we're not just talking about June. We're talking about April, May, June, July, August, September, at the least. And then we'll see how far we can push that. That's the reason why we have so much capacity, is we want to see how far on those shoulders that we can meet our needs and still drive a little bit. So now let's take in a little healthy dose of reality. We don't just magically stop needing power in winter, especially if we're going to be relying on electricity to power our cars. Okay? So the thing to remember is that we have not eliminated the curve and we have not reduced our overall consumption from the grid. The goal is to remain neutral, all right? And that way we don't use any more power over the course of a year than we have. But at the same time, we've made a shift to electric transportation, all right? That's a great trade-off to me to produce the same amount of power, all right? Well, we're talking about the duck curve, right? So what we have done is that we have shifted that peak demand from summer to winter, and we have stretched out the curve, all right? And so now there's not going to be this crazy day-to-day fluctuation of how much power the utilities have to provide on an hour-to-hour basis. So the flip side to all of this is that you're going to be adding 30 kilowatt hours a day per 100 miles of driving, all right, to your home's consumption in the winter, all right? So you won't be producing solar for around 2 months or so, and not enough to do anything but to offset a little bit your daily consumption, all right? And you still need to drive. You need to get to work. You need to get the kids to school. If you're a business, you still need to be able to run your vans. So at this point, it's like I said before, it's too early for me to give any kind of definitive opinion on what our findings are about, what winter's really going to look like, or when winter is going to end, and that's going to change depending on your latitude. It's going to change on your elevation. So these are going to be hard numbers based on where we are right now, which is in the Sacramento area. But when you set up the home for energy sovereignty capacity, in other words, 30, 60, 90 kilowatt hours of battery power, you're not smoothing over the course of a day. You're smoothing it out over the course of a week. And so now we can look at how the utility looks in winter. So you have three choices. A system that has batteries can either trickle charge at a certain rate all day long to make up for what it lost the previous day, or it can, in the evening when you charge your electric vehicle or right after you charge your electric vehicle, it can decide to take a slug from the grid equivalent to what your shortfall was the previous day, or you could take a 80 kilowatt hour or so, 60 kilowatt hour slug off of the utility power, and then that would last you somewhere between 4 and 8 days, depending on what time of year and what the weather was like. So let's take a look at that first solution, because I think that that's the one that we're really going to see. So let's pull up this illustration here. So remember, we're talking about a home with 60 to 90 kilowatt hours of battery. So getting through the day, not a problem. Even 4 days, piece of cake. So let's start this thought experiment off by drawing what an average daily usage on that might be. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to call that line that we're going to put in 60 kilowatts. So let's put that in. Boom. And so the reason for that is that we've got 30 kilowatt hours average home to run the home for a day. And then we've got 100 miles of driving at 300 watt hours per mile, or basically 30 kilowatt hours per 100 miles. And again, don't worry if this doesn't look like your consumption curve. The important part is the result and what the grid actually sees. All right? So now we look at solar production, and it's actually possible for the utility company to access the information that Tesla is pulling off of the Powerwall. But I don't think it's practical or necessary really for them to do that. I think everything can be done locally, and it should be done locally right at the Powerwall with a little help from Tesla. And so let's take a look at that. So your system will know how much battery power it has and how much it has to make up for the shortfall on the caused by the previous day. So we'll pull up a screenshot from winter. This was taken a couple of days ago, and and let's imagine that it's for the previous day. It's midnight. The system is examining what happened yesterday, so it needs to know what to do today at 12:01 a.m. So here's the boom. So the system knows that it produced 24.6 kilowatt hours of solar yesterday, and the system also knows that the home used 32.8, and so that means that with the shortfall, pulled 8.2 kilowatts out of the battery. So let's add on 30 kilowatt hours to represent 100 miles of electric vehicle driving for the day, and then that brings us to a daily total of 62.8 kilowatt hours, with a shortfall of 38.2 kilowatt hours. So this is the amount that needs to be replaced, that 38.2 kilowatt hours that wasn't covered by the solar that day. So now we go back to those three ways of handling it. So the smoothest way for the utility company to deal with this is to insist that each system track, trend, and predict. So it tracks the previous day's solar production, it trends what the production is over the course of a week, and then it predicts what the next few days' consumption might be based on weather patterns and other historical data. All right? And so all of this, it's easily accomplished locally, right at the Powerwall 2 on a daily basis. The system simply sees that it needs to replenish 38.2 kilowatt hours, and then it sets its charge rate accordingly. So let's round it upwards. We'll say 40 kilowatt hours, right? And so the system at midnight knows that over the course of the next day that it has to recover 40 kilowatt hours. So what does it do? So here's what the grid would see. The grid would see this. 1.66 kilowatts straight trickle charge all day long. And then that would recover the amount of power necessary to cover what we had discussed previously. So then in another video, we also talked about the total solar day, that period between when solar stops producing the previous day and when solar stops producing on the current day. Well, that time period is really important, and I told you it would be. So now you can see that at that moment, the system can already start to make some predictions about what it might need to do the next day. Well, it can take those predictions, and via Tesla, it can collect all of those into an average data pool that it will then send to the utility companies, so they can already start to prepare for what's going to happen the next day. And then at midnight, like we showed, the system makes its decision and sets its charge rate. So it sees this every single day for approximately 2.5 months. All right, no curve, no scrambling to figure out how to turn idle plants on in midday, nothing, just gentle fluctuations of charge based on what happened yesterday. All right, so let that sink in for a minute. All right, so you're at a power plant and you need to figure out how much power you're going to need. You come in with your coffee, you look at the weather reports, you look at the data from Tesla, you then see how much solar was produced by the various systems that previous day, and then you set your plants to ramp up or reduce power tomorrow at midnight, because you were just given the exact amount of power that these systems need to make up for. Not that they're going to need, to make up for, because they didn't need anything. That consumption line was flat. All right? So in order to do that, at this point, we need to make it clear that this is what we could do. But in order to do this, Tesla is going to have to allow people to charge off of the grid. All right? And the utility companies are going to have to drop any pretense about time of day usage or any of that. All of their excuses go away for ramping up, ramping down, buying power from here, buying power from there. They already know for days what their power requirement is going to be. All right? So these, upwards and downwards measurements, these things are going to be measured in weeks or months now, not hours. And the individual homeowners taking on the responsibility, the financial responsibility of making that happen, they need to be honored in this. It's an exchange. This is, this isn't going to be a one-sided future. I don't think it can be. So the other two modes that we were talking about, where you can draw off of the grid in chunks, I think that the consumer should still have the ability to do that, but that shouldn't be the default settings for the equipment. You should be able to do that when you decide to do it. If there's bad weather coming in and whatnot. Currently, let me pull up this screenshot here real quick. So this is a new setting by Tesla. This is their Storm Watch setting, and it's them being mighty magnanimous about allowing you to do something that the system should actually have been allowed to do anyway, and that is that in the case of a storm, then they will charge your system to 100% so that you can then weather the storm and have enough for reserve in case of a power outage. Well, that puts them in an interesting position of being the ones to decide when a storm gets bad enough. All right, I don't think I think that opens them up for some legal issues on down the line. But everything you should know about the duck curve and electric vehicles, this should arm you with all the information that you need to have intelligent conversations with others, be they other people that are interested in powering off of the grid and getting an electric vehicle to kind of wean them off of gasoline, or whether or not you're talking to somebody who wants to deny any of this is actually happening, or talk with a legislator to tell them that you want certain things, you demand that you have the ability to charge your batteries off of the grid, and that the utility companies act responsibly and honor your financial investment. So that's it for this special of the Energy Sovereignty Project. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, like and subscribe. It's always helpful. And if this is the first video that you've seen, by all means, have a look at some of the previous videos, see what got us to this point, and follow along with us, because everything you just saw here, everything that I just talked about, we're going to be living it. We're going to be showing it as it happens. This is not theoretical. So again, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.